shed any light on some of that which is going on first, and then maybe we'll look across at some of the other things you guys want to look at. I've been listening to a few of the politicians in the news lately saying just that, and that's the way they define it. This is complex. What is your take on it? Is this complex, or is this a simple matter?
So this is, in point of fact, this is a fight that started not long after Joshua took the Israelites across the Jordan River into Canaan. Because the reality, Hamas and the modern state of Palestine, just like the modern political state of Israel are the modern descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Hamas and Palestine are the modern descendants of the Philistines. In fact, the word Palestine is a Romanization of the word Philistine, which was used, in the early days of the Roman Empire to kind of put down the Jews.
Yeah.
And so this is a fight that's been going on for, literally millennia. And people,
has there ever really been a state of Palestine? I'm doing my history. And
even in biblical times, the Philistines was never a discrete nation. It was a series of 5 city states.
Yeah.
Gath and Ekron and Ashdod and Escalon, and these were all just 5 city states that basically cooperated and worked together, but it was never a discrete nation.
Well, if you're called a Philistine nowadays, you're not being complimented, right? They were a pretty aggressive state, and if I'm not mistaken, that was sort of a small sliver of land toward the bottom of where Gaza is now, where Philistia or whatever it was called.
Yeah, I mean, they were always kind of a coastal seafaring type people, and I mean, the history is fascinating. They entered the Iron Age, long before Israel did. So they were technologically advanced, in the ancient times, and that was part of the strategic advantage that they held in David's reign, and it wasn't until about halfway through David's reign that Israel entered the Iron Age.
Yeah, well, there's three points in history that I jotted down that seem to show, plus much other evidence that sort of demonstrates Israel's legitimate birth. One is the first Jewish state was from 1000 to 586 BC. The second Jewish state was 538 to 653 BC. The third Jewish state from 48 to present. And all in between there, they were attacked by, they were taken control of by the Romans, taken control by Babylon, taken control of
Syria.
All of this is going on. So what is the truth here? When I listen to certain people in the news lately, like President Obama has been in the news this past week saying it's a complex issue, and if we could just sit them down and give them a 2-state solution, then there would be peace. What is your take on that? Melissa, I see a grin on your face.
No, there's not going to be peace there.
I can't hear you. No peace.
I think you're muted, Melissa.
Yeah, you go ahead, Glenn. And I'll jump in after you.
There's not going to be peace in the Middle East. There's a couple of really sticky challenges. One is that there's money pouring in from Iran, and they're a theocracy, and in their idea. I'm not Iranian, and I'm not part of their theocracy, so I'm just trying to the way I understand it is they do not want any Jews alive on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So they are spending money, sending money to people. So the Palestinian Authority was voted into office decades ago, and almost immediately pushed out of the country. This partition, Gaza. So the legitimate leaders of that area aren't even able to really lead, because you have this militant terrorist organization terrorizing, funded but by another state. So
Okay, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, is Israel perfect? We see the history of Israel. I mean, even through scriptures. I mean, it's not been a perfect, people. They have fallen from God. They have, disobeyed God, as all of us have, and which is actually really interesting. I think the way that God uses Israel in Scripture to show us the spiritual condition of our hearts and how we, our idolatry and those sort of things. So yeah, I don't think that any of us are saying that Israel's perfect, that they are, in any way. But there is, God has a plan, right? And so we do have to look at these issues spiritually. Political forces are always going to try to make a rationale and to say we can just sit down and we can just do this and we can just work this out. But there is a such thing as evil and there is a such thing as good. And so I think that we're seeing this played out before us. And it's hard to take. No one wants to take sides ultimately in these in these political figures and that sort of thing. I mean, I think like Glenn said, I mean, there's not going to be we just sit down, write up a treaty. This is we just work it out. There's real legitimate evil forces.
So has history shown that we've been able to work it out, that any resolutions have been able to come through? Any type of two-state solution that's been proposed, to my knowledge, has always been rejected by the Arabs.
Yeah, the closest would probably be the Camp David Accord between Israel and Omar Sadat under the Carter administration, and that didn't really lead to any sort of lasting peace in the Middle East either.
Yeah. So let's sort of go back in history just a little bit, right? So we know that historically, wars have always shifted borders, right? When one nation attacks another, the borders change. They've done that throughout all time, and usually the nation that was attacked, that defended itself, had all rights to just redraw the borders where they chose to. There was nothing considered immoral about that, especially when you were attacked. And especially when you look at the fact that there was not or ever a Palestinian state. I think they've tried to create a state, but from my understanding, after World War I, that whole region of the Arab territories belonged to the Ottoman Empire, and it was taken control of by the British after World War I, including the area where Israel is. And through the years, through different types of accords, they've tried to work with the people, but the Arabs went to war. I'm really giving a thumbnail sketch of what I remember here, but the Arabs went to war with the British, and there's just always been conflict going on in that region, but it belonged to the British at that point because they had conquered it. They had taken control of it from the Ottoman Empire. So through the years, they tried to come to various resolutions, and the UN in 1946, I think, worked on some type of resolution for all the what do you call it? The diaspora of the Jews, diaspora that have been spread around the world, people that had been hated on by many countries and many lands, needed a place to where they could come. So the UN, the United Nations, with the controlling power, which was the British who had seized the Ottoman Empire, decided to give that land to a new state. So it became a legitimate state of Israel, I think, or the year after that, in 1948.
Yeah.
But what happened immediately after 1948? Anybody?
It was a war immediately. Trying to keep
war.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they didn't recognize, none of the Arabs recognized them as a state. They just wanted to annihilate them as a people.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think you're kind of you're actually accurate in what you're saying, but it's really oversimplification. So, again, I don't have a dog in the hunt on this. I'm not Jewish. I'm not a Palestinian. I'm a Christian. So I have that take. But imagine that you're living in the middle of Idaho, and it's a frontier town. It's not part of the United States, but all of a sudden it gets taken over and by the United States and made a state. Now all of a sudden you've been living there for a long time, and all of a sudden you're told that you now belong to the United States. Thankfully we don't have an awful lot of our history where people have rebelled against being citizens of this country. But you had people living their lives in 1948. All of a sudden they're told that they're part of a country of Israel, and they're not Jewish. And all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people who we thought we got rid of these people years ago coming back, right? I mean, I know I'm oversimplifying it as well, but of course there was going to be some conflict there. And the oversimplification of the creation of the state of Israel, it's because nobody wanted the Jews in their backyard. It wasn't this magnanimous, the British are being really kind and, hey, let's just give them a chunk of land here. Let's give them this stuff we ended up with. We don't want it. They didn't want the Jews in their backyard. They wanted to shove them off someplace else as well. The history of the Jewish nation being shoved off someplace else.
Yeah.
Chock full of it.
However, I think just as you sort of implied there were already historic generations of Jewish people living in that region already, so they were there. And it is my understanding that many of the Arabs fled, and a lot of the Jews from all the surrounding Arab states were forced to leave, and they came into Israel during that time, during I guess 47, whenever they were battling between Jordan and Egypt and Syria and whomever was around them at the time. So no one in the Arab world wanted to work with them, although it's, to my knowledge, Israel was making great efforts to try to integrate the Arabs, and still have to this day. I believe that there are a lot of Arabs working in Israel, and they've offered them full citizenship.
Right.
So the whole thing with, what is your take on the whole thing, though, that you've learned to this point about why Gaza is the way it is, why the West Bank and East Jerusalem is the way that it is? Any insight on that, or did I wake you up too early?
Well, I mean, part of the situation with Gaza and the West Bank is these are carve-outs that Israel has offered, has proffered as sort of an olive branch to Palestinians and these different groups. And as has been pointed out, by a number of comments, the Arab world has on multiple occasions very consistently, continually avowed that their goal, their end game, is to see the annihilation of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And so to me, it is absurdly naive to sit down and say that it would be like suggesting that there would have been a way to sit down Adolf Hitler and some emissary of the scattered Jewish people during World War II and say we can come up with an amicable solution to this. Hitler and his regime had very clearly stated that they were after the annihilation of the Jewish people. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. And, basically the current situation is just simply the nation of Israel saying, we've had enough. You've backed us into a corner one more time. We're going to bring Hamas back into the Stone Age so they can never wage war again.
Right.
And, I mean, if someone had been messing with us that way, that's exactly what we would do.
And I think many of us probably in previous days, weeks, and months have had this conversation about the good people. I think all of us who are Christians, or even just people with good hearts, consider the innocent people I cannot say that my heart does not go out to the innocents that are hurt. That has always been the case. When Hitler went on the rampage, more German innocents were killed than British or American, because obviously we had big separation of ocean in between us. That's the way of war. Innocent people unfortunately get hurt, and it breaks my heart to see that. And and can you say every nation is pure in what they do? No, I can't say not every person involved. There's going to be people out there who individually break crimes, who do things wrong. It happens in our own military, where we have to court-martial them, execute them in our own military. It happens. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's just that I think we handle it appropriately. We recognize that it is part of our system. Then I know we're jumping around a little bit with history and politics and everything else, but there's such a thing as the 6-Day War in 1967, right? 1967. Israel was attacked pretty much the way they were attacked by Gaza this last time, except it was by multiple Arab nations around them, right? So Jordan, Egypt, what am I missing there? Syria. I have to look at a map because I'm not as I don't understand the region as well as I should. But we're talking about borders moving. When the 6-Day War happened, well, it kind of blew it away. It kind of, there was a big parcel of land that had been agreed upon to be given to Egypt and Jordan. Back then, there was a huge parcel of land and Israel had agreed to it. They were going to give away 80% of their land for peace, but the Arab nations apparently wouldn't have anything to do with it, right? So during that war, you look at all the different scattered areas of the West Bank, all those little. There's more than 100, right? Probably 150 different encampments around the West Bank, or places where people are pretty much living peacefully. Some of them call them what kind of camps? Refugee camps. But that's one of those words that's used in the news to kind of heighten your sensibilities, because if you go over there, you think you're going to look at a refugee camp, and you're going to see a lot of tents and people, with bonfires on the ground, barely surviving, like they are on our southern border right now, trying to eat and move and that kind of thing. But it's not the case. These are towns. They're operating as cities. They're coming across the border. They're working with the Israeli people. Most of the people there, and I'm not as informed on those matters as I would like to be, but most of them seem to be interacting with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, fairly peaceably. Am I wrong?
I can't say that I have that boots on the ground perspective, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's but then again, we can't condemn Israel for cutting off lands from Gaza, for reshaping the West Bank. They were the ones that were attacked. After the war, they took control of it. They took controlling power, and through the years, they've tried to give it back.
Right.
And you know what? People who are listening are saying, "Yeah, Mike, you guys are speaking in generalities." But I wrote some things down that I'd like to mention if you guys would let me, and then you can comment it on your perspective of this as possible. But from the get-go, I said that the Arabs have always rejected peace. Someone listening is going to go, "No, not true." Okay, write down, re-listen to this, check your history. And see if it's not true or not. The Arabs rejected the PLO Commission plan, the separation of the Jews and the Arabs, that gave a lot of lands to the Arabs. The Arabs rejected peace partition plans proposed by the United Nations in 47. We talked about that. Then they rejected the Oslo Accord 93, then the Wide River Accord in 98, two other different accords that I can't even say it because it's Jewish sounding, but in 2000 and 2008, the Omertz was a generous offer of land. What I found and what I was researching, it said that every single peace proposal, deal proposed by Israel or anyone else has been rejected by Arabs because they do not accept that the Jews, or that there should be a Jewish state anywhere in the region. So as long as that is the case, you can't simultaneously say, and you hear it in the news, we're hearing it in the news every day, that you can't simultaneously say there shouldn't be a Jewish state anywhere in the region and then believe that there are any of these Arabs that will accept a two-state solution.
Right.
Right?
Well, I don't know about the any Arabs that will accept it, but there are always going to be adherents. Again, it goes back to my initial talk about, we have people who theologically speaking do not think, they think God wants Israel removed from the map.
Right.
It's a holy thing to them to remove these people in this nation. You cannot have peace when it's going against what God says. Again, this is not, I'm playing the advocate here, but it cannot happen. And I think it is a little bit of an oversimplification, Mike, for you to say that Arabs have always rejected this. No, the Arabs who are theologically bent on moving Israel have always rejected it. But there are plenty of Arabs who want to live peacefully there.
Yes. Okay. Well, I agree with you, Glenn, but let's put it in the hands of the government, which are the people who are controlling that.
And they're here to help us.
Huh?
And they're here to help.
Absolutely.
Always. Every government.
As Dutch said, the 9 scariest words on the planet are "we're from the government and we're here to help."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Was it did Reagan say that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it was Reagan.
That's
Yeah,
Dutch.
it was him. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we know this of the Iranian people. We've had this conversation for a lot of years, right? But the Ayatollah and the guard and all those people, they are pulling the puppet strings on Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and everything else that is going on politically. And Glenn, you know, I think you're right. You have to separate it politically and socially, because there's you're actually in the news, you're hearing some Palestinians begging the Hamas. And when we say Hamas is the government of Gaza. So don't be confused. Hamas is the terrorist government. And these, I'll say, poor people to some extent are like some people in early days of Germany. They've been brainwashed by one voice, whether it be socially or religiously. And they have been persuaded by the religious voices, Glenn, that I think that you hit on very well. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I thought you were saying something. My buddy, Dr. Mike Lacona, put out something the other day where he just went down a list of the different things that, gosh, look, I know that all Muslims don't believe this. There are a lot of very well-meaning, good-hearted Muslims who call themselves Reformed that don't, or they redefine the text in various kinds of ways in the Quran. So, but there are those people in Hamas and Hezbollah groups and some of the groups in Iran that look at the articles of the Hamas Charter, Article 7 of the Hamas Charter. The Islamic resistance movement aspires to be the realization of Allah's promise no matter how long that should take. The prophet, Allah bless him and grant him salvation, said, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews. When the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, "Oh, Muslims," and Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. It goes on, but every part of their article is attached to the Quran and just goes on, encouraging them, telling them that religiously that they need to obey Allah, and this is the way to obey Allah. And what have we seen from that in the attacks in Gaza?
Well, and I hear people occasionally talk about these, so-called Muslim scholars that are, redefining jihad, this internal struggle with sin and this, that, and the other. But, as conservative Christians, how do we look on guys like Bart Ehrman and others who want to redefine these classic Christian theological positions as being, non-miraculous,
right,
and more sectarian? So, I'm completely unconvinced by folks that talk about, these elements that want to redefine classical Islam, because that's not who is running the show. And those are people that are not viewed as mainstream thinkers at all. What I find really fascinating, though, in America, classically, Western Christianity has viewed Israel as God's chosen people. It started with Abraham, it continued with Isaac and Jacob, and it continued throughout the Old Testament. That was reaffirmed in the New Testament. And today you have people that, I'm interacting with on Facebook and having conversations with, saying, yes, but that's different from the modern secular state of Israel. And you have folks that are saying maybe we shouldn't be supporting Israel in this fight. And I think they're hearing all of the rhetoric about, Israel saying, we want to eliminate Hamas. But yet when Hamas has been sitting there terrorizing them for generations, there comes a point where, you try to peacefully and amicably work out a solution. And when that is no longer possible, you simply take action. I think that's where they're at today. And this notion that somehow or other the secular state of Israel is somehow removed from the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't see any way to biblically defend that idea.
Right.
Other than the similar sort of redefinition of ideas, like the so-called placating Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, how do you, again, negotiation, right? Negotiation is when people sit down, they're reasonable, they're objective, and they put, things to the side, and they come up with a middle ground solution, right? That benefits all parties. Again, when one does not think that you should even be in existence and hates every fiber of your being for being in existence, how do you legitimately work out that, plan? So it's interesting because, we pray about, and we're told in scripture to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but ultimately when we're praying that, we're praying for the Lord's return, because that is what is going to bring about peace in that region. And so as much political intervention and negotiations that we, as you point out, Michael, just the history, it just has not worked. And I guess we can keep trying and, reinventing the wheel. But there is, we're praying for the Lord to come back. And like you said, Dr. Dave, I mean, we are, we can't expect Israel just to kind of oddly sit by and just do nothing. War is hard and it's ugly. But it is one of those things that God, he gives nations, those ability, those powers to declare those things, right? Not individuals, but nations. And so, and for a bigger purpose, for the good of the people. So sometimes it's just an ugly reality. And you do it as humanely as possible.
Right.
But, we just have to, we have to look at it from all those, those perspectives.
Well, and some of the same people that are criticizing Israel for for their defending themselves, sort of seemed to smooth over the fact that this literally started by Hamas, paratrooping into a music festival and killing 5,000 people. And somehow or other, we can overlook that, but then accuse Israel of this vast overreaction and whatnot. And it's like, that really doesn't fly.
Hey, something that hit me the other day, maybe you guys are better students of history than I am, but in previous wars, during World War II, how many days into World War II did we have a humanitarian pause?
This is new. This is modern war. We're trying to not kill civilians as much as possible,
but we don't. All of our weapons are smart now.
The closest thing to a humanitarian pause.
Yeah, the humanitarian
pause they had in World War II were things like the various Christmas truces and things like that. But this notion of a humanitarian pause is kind of antithetical to the notion of war.
Yeah, when during the first part of our roll into Iraq and Afghanistan did we take a humanitarian pause? I don't remember.
So I would say the humanitarian pause was something like this. Gaza, Hamas rolled into this music festival and just slaughtered civilians. When Israel was preparing to roll into Gaza, they sent word ahead of time. We are coming. If you're not part of this fight, you should leave now.
Yeah.
So that is not a typical war doctrine, and the fact that Israel did that and conveniently not talked about in the news cycle all that much.
Yeah.
That's a pretty magnanimously humanitarian act to say our fight is not with you rank and file people of Gaza. Our fight is with Hamas. You need to get out of the way.
What's your take on the folks that you're seeing? I'm seeing different debates. I'm seeing folks on the streets, college campuses. It seems like the 18 to 25-year-olds and the college professors have completely lost their minds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a perennial thing. Pick a year. It's always the same.
Does it not scare you though that level of
we send our children to college to learn how to think for themselves, and one of the ways they learn how to think for themselves is they go listen to idiots that are teaching, and they think about it for a while, and they come out of college and they go, he was kind of an idiot, she was kind of an idiot.
But you know what, this particular thing though is we don't live in 1967 anymore. Right.
This is lack of information, right?
Oh man, you mar your life now. You mar your career. I know there are business people that are writing down the names of these law students.
Yep. And
they will not. There's a lot of them, and God bless them. But many of these Jewish firms are run by. These firms are run by Jewish lawyers. So even some of the most liberal ones. So they are crippling themselves, but. There's one aspect of this that I guess I can appreciate is that they're no longer hiding. They're showing their true colors and they can be identified. I would rather them be identified earlier than to, I would say liberal ideology has pretty much taken over secular universities anyway. And that these types of things, do we need to be paranoid or have conspiracy theories or any of that? No. Should we be alert to it as concerned citizens and for our children's sake and the type of things that we're consuming and our children are consuming? Because I see, honestly, people 35 and younger consuming most of their news from sophisticated comedians.
Mm-hmm.
And so those aren't children. Yes, our children are that age, Mike, but those are adults.
Right.
We raised them, gave them as much smarts as we could genetically.
Yeah.
Some of us gave more. Some of us gave less.
Hey, don't brag on yourself, Glenn. Come on.
I wasn't. So, and then when they become adults, they get to make their own stupid mistakes and decisions. And yeah, you can't tell somebody, don't listen to that news channel. That's not news. That's entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I almost
the encouraging thing to me, though, is, you look at the situation at Cornell where they had a student who was online ranting, posting anti-Jewish threats, threatening to kill Jewish people and this, that, and the other. And now all of a sudden he's hauled into federal court for hate crimes. And it wasn't that long ago where, universities would just not even be involved in stuff like that. And I think now, it's the sort of thing where if in education theory, you have this notion of groupthink where you surround yourself by this echo chamber of like-minded people, and the conversation progresses to the most extreme form of dialogue. And so now you have these students that have been in this groupthink of anti-Semitism, and suddenly they feel comfortable and emboldened to come out and make all these just murderous threats. And so now they're beginning to recognize that maybe we should address this. And these liberal campuses are some of the same groups of people that initiated hate crime legislation back in the day anyway. And so now it's coming back around to them.
Well, here's okay, if I can, one of when I say fear, it's not like I live in fear. Okay. I learned, as a small child not to touch the stove. So I have, a healthy fear. There's such a thing. But we know historically, and we had one of our shows, you can go back and listen to it, on neo-Marxism, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about the long march through the institutions by Rudolf Dutschke and all his comrades, going all the way back to Gramsci and Marx. Gramsci changed it into a cultural Marxism. We've slowly seen that long march through the institutions that has changed our culture. Now, my healthy fear that I want to take my little rudder and try to move is that I fear the same things have been going on with the way that I'm not sure how to phrase this, because I'm for freedom of speech. I'm for the institutions. I'm for education, for hearing all sides. But it seems as though the same types of elements that have shifted the cultural paradigm are doing the same thing with their religious philosophies, their fanatical religious philosophies in our institutions. Now, if you look at the history, and I'd have to go back and reread some of it in the early days of Hitler when he took control, it was a slow, gradual boil the frogs type of thing.
Right.
Until he was able to seize control in the name of taking care of the German people.
Right.
Early on.
Right.
So there comes a point when our freedoms reach a point of diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we think about like social activism, right, and social justice activism, it's bigger than I think what we have even thought about. It is a form of, it's a worldview. It's a whole form of almost salvation, for these young people, right? Mm-hmm. So they found identities and this social justice awareness, and sometimes haven't many of the positions have really not thought through, right, very well. But it just gives them a sense of identity and purpose. Right. So for me, I think of it in different ways. I see it, of course, it's misguided because that's their identity. But it's a great opportunity too for the church to be the church and to try to show these kids that, there really is a purpose beyond these temporal issues that you are invested so much in, that you think that you have the answer and that you can screen people down and shock, your shock value, like you don't need that to be okay, to be a fully functioning, happy person, right? Because they're not happy at the end of the day. They're not. What are we looking at? We're looking at what mental health crises. Just all these identity issues, right? All these things. So it's not it's ultimately not for your good, in the end. It's just making you more angry, making you less informed. And it's causing more of a divide that you claim that you want to bring, unity, bring people together, and you're just doing the absolute opposite. Right. So it's kind of multifaceted. I look at, that it's really sad, but it's also an opportunity too, but I like what you said, like a healthy fear, right? We're not afraid. We're not in our houses like, oh, I can't go outside and dialogue with people. Like, we want to do that, right?
Yeah.
We have to. That's what Jesus tells us to do.
Right. Back to some of what Glenn was touching on earlier. There are those people living in Idaho or Montana. Some folks up in Montana do want their own country, though. Right? That's where Glenn's originally from, Flathead, Montana.
Right.
I met Glenn.
Well, that explains why he looks the way he does.
No, well,
yeah, I fit right in there, don't I?
Okay, that was good.
I met Glenn at American Forces Network, Bremerhaven, in 1986, 87, somewhere in that time frame. But anyway, what I was saying is there's always been those people who were the peaceniks, who were the Berkeley guys, who were genuine. They wanted peace. And there were those hippies, the early days of drugs. They were looking for enlightenment. They were looking for truth. Okay. Don't think that was something else at that point. It wasn't. A lot of them, they didn't like the lack of answers, the lack of meaning, the lack of purpose. They were searching for enlightenment. They were searching with drugs to see if they could reach a higher plane and find answers. But the answers weren't there, and that tumbled into a drug epidemic in our country. We lost complete control of that. And I guess that's what I'm saying with whether it be with neo-Marxism or the religious fanaticism that we see being inculcated in our institutions. Let's not let it tumble out of control. That's why we have shows like this where we can talk about it peaceably. We don't have to get into fights on the streets. Although if we're not aware of what's going on, it is my fear that some of these aggressive voices and aggressive elements of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the voices from Iran, who are the puppet masters, are going to, and I believe probably already have, because of the way our southern border is in America, started to infiltrate us. So we're not a sleepy little town anymore. Okay, that's great. I know that there's a lot of folks that grew up in beautiful little peaceful towns and they could leave their doors open at night, and that's a nice feeling. But we live in a day and age where you don't have to be always suspicious, but you do have to keep your head on a swivel. You do need to be aware of your environment, and you do need to stay involved. I love it that during COVID that we started getting more involved with our students, seeing what the teachers were doing. We got doctors like Dave here, Melissa with mental health, Glenn taking care of the West Coast for us, me taking care of the East Coast. You know what? We have some smart people that are doing their part to try to talk this through and to understand it without. Am I right if I use the word gaslight? Do we get gaslighted by some of these voices?
Absolutely. And very often the voices that accuse others of gaslighting, that's kind of the whole point that they're doing, which I find ironic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, when I was in Israel, I had a tour guide, and it's been interesting because my tour guide. His name is Yoav Rodham. He's been on Fox News lately, and he was my guide for Christians United for Israel when I was over there. Plus, he's been touring through Florida and through the United States speaking. And if I could, I'd like to read just a little part of what he said on the Fox News feed. Some people immediately go, Fox News. It's like jingle entertainment. But that's and that's okay. I think I learned early that you need to listen to the MSNBC voices. You need to listen to the Fox News voices. I do try to stay away from the fascist ends. I do like to listen to the left of middle and the right of middle. That I think that more moderate voices. But listen to what he said. He says he's pleading as an Israeli who lives there and gives tours. I am urging you. I am pleading with you. I am imploring you. Wake up. The irrational hatred of the Jewish people and the demonizing of Israel is reaching proportions so dangerous that if people of conscience do not stand up, speak out, and push back, Jewish blood will start flowing in America, England, and many other countries around the world. Wake up.
And we see that we've seen that already, where there's been I think wasn't there a headline this morning about a guy in California being dying after his injuries from an anti-Semitic mob?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's come.
It's going to pull all the crazies, all the sheeple, all the uninformed that may lean in that direction out of the woodwork. That's why the other voices need to educate, lead, and get involved as much as possible. We can't isolate. There's, historically, I think the church isolated themselves in the mid 20th century too much. They didn't get involved in social, and in not everyone. I can't always say everyone, but I don't think we got involved with education, with our towns, with our country as much as we should. We isolated into little churches, protecting ourselves, staying with our people, instead of being salt and light in the world, like Jesus said.
So this is a really good question for you, Mike. What position, we don't really want to take a position, but what should we be doing as the church to help right now? I mean, should we make sure that the people who are in Gaza that are hurting get humanitarian aid? Is that what, because that's where my brain goes.
Absolutely we should.
There's people that are hurting.
There's no question that we should. And in fact, that is being facilitated by the IDF as we speak. It's not this neat all or nothing thing. It's not that, we support Israel because we hate Gaza. We support Israel because we support Israel, but we still want to be sensitive to the fact that war is messy and there are people that need aid. And so,
So here's the other really crazy thing that I have to keep reminding myself. There are Palestinian Christians.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they are.
We forget there are Christians there where the church was originally planted.
Yeah. Yeah. You remember Bonhoeffer during World War II? Bonhoeffer during World War II, there were Christians there.
I'm a bit old. I can't say I remember him, but I've read about him.
Yeah. Of all the folks here, I thought you would remember, Dave.
I don't think I'm as old as you, Mike.
I think you actually might be the oldest one here, Mike.
Dave and I on the sides of our message board have been learning how to politely stir it up we called it the real squabble. So we were looking for, ways that we could insult each other to get us stirred to squabble.
Yes,
and,
I
think we reached we'll share that on another show. Hey, and we're still
Love it.
Well, maybe we'll share we'll just share them all in a future show. But Glenn, you're so right. And you know what? The thing is, Samaritan's Purse, I would point to Samaritan's Purse with Franklin Graham, because Samaritan's Purse and the Southern Baptist Church, along with the Catholic Church, are the primary supporters of the Red Cross, right? They're like the primary supporters who offer supplies to the Red Cross. And Samaritan's Purse, if you go to their website, they're already working on Operation Christmas Child, and they're standing ready right now. I just called their place up. They're standing ready to respond with disaster relief, critical needs for victims, famine, food, water, shelter, medicine, and they're doing it as you were saying, Glenn, all in the name of Jesus Christ.
Christians, we don't care about people, though, right? We don't.
No, yeah, that we get accused of it sometimes, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have those that act that way. But if we're following the teachings of Jesus, we know that, my goodness, you know what? Even after World War II, we fed hungry soldiers, German soldiers, right? We helped try to rebuild, and we put them back in charge. I had a German friend of mine from Bremen stay with me for the last month because she ran the Chicago Marathon and then stayed here and then went up and just Sunday ran the New York Marathon. And where was I going with that? I just went off a rabbit trail.
Well, I mean, how many POWs from Germany and Italy and Japan and other places that were incarcerated in the U.S. chose to stay? You didn't see a lot of American POWs in other countries that just kind of chose to stay.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it's simply because America treated their POWs much better than any other nation. And that's historically been true.
Oh, I know what I was saying. I was telling her because she was talking about how the German trains just don't run on time anymore. And I was like, well, one of the main reasons that Marshall put the Germans back in charge of the trains is because he knew they could make them run on time. You know, so we don't, you know, we take the view of being a victor and winning and not taking, but trying to revitalize and to restore. We're not a conquering nation,
right?
So, you know,
right.
that's
what happened in Japan after the war, right? You know, we basically bombed Japan out of the war, and then we built them up into the technological superpower on the planet.
Okay, so time out here. You know why we don't conquer? It's because we don't have to exert our influence. The reason we don't own the places that we've conquered is because we negotiate places for us to put our military there without having to actually do the minutia of working in and working for those people there. We're not that magnanimous, Mike.
Well, I kind of think there's somewhere in between what
we've been taught this, that we don't conquer and take. You know, we don't have to conquer and take to exert our influence.
Well, I think there's a place in between what you said and what I said, and that is in modern day civilized countries don't conquer and take. Historically, yeah, we conquered and took. That was the way of the world. But I really think it's a bridge too far to say that the reason that we, you know, go to these places and haven't done it is because of exerting influence. I don't think it's, I mean, these countries like Germany and Italy, and because now they're NATO agreements, and I don't think we would go to war with them if they told us to leave.
So to my original point, Daniel Immerwahr, How to Hide an Empire. Just thumb through that for really a better view of how we do it as Americans and the lies that we as Americans have been told. And it's not just wars. We did this to our indigenous people. We did this to people who moved here, that we invited here, and then we bastarded. I mean, we were horrible.
Oh, our hands aren't clean. I think Melissa touched on that earlier. No nation is clean. We have the way we treated the Native Americans. We have the way that we treated blacks and slavery. We have lots of issues.
We have Chinese problems. We have Filipino problems.
Irish. The Irish.
Exactly. Every single subset that we are not clean.
You know, I know. Do you know that, you know, as bad as slavery was, that there were folks in Irish parts of the 5 Points in New York who felt like they were in hell. Other than being beaten and in slavery, there were some black people in 5 Points in New York back in the late 1800s who thought that it would have been much better to be working inside of a house somewhere in the South than it would be in the rat-infested crap holes of 5 Points, New York. And that's where the Irish came over. They were, and the Italians, and at some point in our country, obviously, from the beginning, the thing with slavery, it's a whole different topic, whole different area, but we've mistreated people. We've been bigoted. There's been a support, there's been a superiority of power, a misuse of power. We can't say that we're pristine, but when you look at our Constitution, it is not something that we do. It's something that we aspire to, right? It's progressive morality. It's just like with us as people. I'm not perfect. I'm not as perfect as I want to be, but if you broke down the bad parts of my life, you could just sign me off. But I believe that nationally, that our Constitution, which is just sort of a covenant, is a way of us working toward moral progressive morality, becoming a better people under God, right? So that it did say that all people are created equal, but we as a nation at that time decided that Black people weren't entirely people.
Right.
We were, the idiots of the time were brainwashed, kind of like these Muslims or Arabs in some of these nations, to believe certain things that they were taught, they were told. A lot of them who were probably in Gaza and who were in the South, they couldn't write, they couldn't read. The Irish who were in the inner cities of New York and in the South, they put their X on stuff, to get something, because they couldn't write, they couldn't read. If you showed up at my home down in southwestern Virginia, close to Kentucky, and you told me horrendous stories about Black people or Irish people or any people, and I trusted you, I believe you. My grandfather, we're on a whole nother subject, but I think it relates to brainwashing and gaslighting across the board. I love my grandfather. I think he was like the John Walton of people. If you ever watched, the Waltons on TV, but he was a man of his time. He was a separate but equal person. And me being a military brat, I nicely asked him, I said, "Are you prejudiced, Papa?" And no, as long as they are in their places and we're in ours. Mm-hmm. And he believed that. Mm-hmm. Right? It took up to my mom's generation and my generation to start changing some of the thinking. Now, I think that we've come a long way and we still have a long ways to go. But back to the Middle East. I think we've kind of concluded that there is no two-state solution, right? Do you guys, in thinking about this, give me some final thoughts on the whole package of what we've been talking about, anything you might have left out, and anything you might want the Israeli people, the Jewish people, Palestinian people, the good ones, to know. And I'll tell you what, Glenn, you look like you're ready to roll, brother.
So there's not going to be a solution. The solution is going to be a war. The solution at the end of the war is going to be whoever is the victor of the war is going to make the rules. It's probably not going to be the Arabs that are pouring money into that. They've just shown themselves in the recent history to not be very good warriors, as the Israelis have shown themselves to be good warriors. So, perpetuating war, the Israelis are good at this. So I just don't think that the solution is going to be good for the Arab states, and so that means that since they want Israel to go away, and Israel is probably not going to go away this time, we're going to have more problems in the future. They're just kicking it down the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Melissa?
I think you just need to send over, 40-year-old women, menopausal women over there. I think we might take care of it.
Wow.
I think it's a pretty aggressive solution. I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah,
all,
we-
three, all, three of, you see all three of us married guys, how our eyes went like this.
Right?
and I'm immediately drawn to this New Yorker Jewish woman who's in menopause, sending a bunch of them over. There's a bunch of them there over there right now, aren't there?
yeah, they take care of it, you know. But
I'm
no,
gonna step
seriously.
away from that.
But seriously, I mean, to me, it's you know, we look at just the sovereignty of God and all of this, right? That we literally our human efforts, as much as we try to influence things and change what's His plan. You know, He's in control, and so it just, you know, as we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we're basically praying for the Lord to intervene and to come back, you know, and so. But yeah, again, like Glenn and like all of you men have said, I mean, there's not going to be a solution where we're going to sit down and just come up with something that makes sense for all sides and all parties. But that again, trusting God's sovereignty. I mean, that's the neat thing about being a believer in these times and these turbulent times. And I pray for the salvation of those in these areas, you know, for them to really cling to that, you know, that, you know, God does have a plan and that He is in control and that, you know, I mean, we experience that in our own lives, right? In different ways, like the things that we go through, right? We see God's hand move in our lives and shape us individually and character-wise and things like that. So, yeah, so in the midst of all of the big news and the big headlines, my heart is for the people who are in the middle, you know, for sure. But yeah, trusting God's sovereignty is everything right now.
And that means doing things.
And doing things, absolutely. Doing things. And our prayers being very, you know, I'm trying to be a lot more focused in my prayer life for these people as well. So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Dave.
So I have some really good friends, Phil and Heidi. They live in Haifa. For years, they lived in Haifa as American expatriates. But a number of years ago, their daughter was killed in a terrorist bus bombing. It is state policy in Israel that if a member of your family is killed in a terrorist attack, that your entire surviving family is granted immediate, irrevocable Israeli citizenship. The irony of that is they do this because they are under a constant terror threat. It's not something that just kind of happens occasionally. It's something that happens constantly. This is not normal for most nations of the world. China is not sitting around, you know, wondering, you know, when they're going to receive the next terror threat from some rogue state in Southeast Asia. And so just the fact that this is the cloud under which Israel has lived for decades, you know, I think that you know, the appearance to me with what's happening today is that they've just simply decided enough is enough. The line in the sand has been drawn, and they are standing up and defending their sovereignty, and you know, which they have every right to do as a sovereign nation.
Yeah. You know, as a person who has been in a couple war zones, 26 years Air Force, I detest war. I think it always has to be the last thing, the very last thing. But sometimes it's inevitable, especially when you have a brutal, horrific enemy that will decapitate old women, mutilate babies, burn them in ovens. They've been doing this, raping women, going into their bomb shelters and just, you know, taking them apart, you know, in the name of their erroneous religion. I'll say, I believe that. I don't think anyone could justify, no one can justify that kind of God, that kind of religion. And that can be for another show. One thing I know from speaking to different Jewish people in my condo is, and one lady that I spoke to in particular at our fitness center the other day, you know, she said, most of them go almost immediately, I'm not a religious Jew, right? And what I've learned in the past few years is 75 to 80% of the Jewish people are not religious Jews. Okay. And I say that with love in my heart when I kind of do that accent. Okay. Because I love Israel. I have like 1 or 2% Ashkenazi Jewish blood in me. So maybe that's where the accent came from. I love the Israeli people. I love that they were God's chosen people. How God has used them to bring the Messiah. Many of them have rejected that and reformed and changed, their perspective on that, just the way jihad has been changed with their reformed methods, Dave, through the years. Those are other lessons for us to think about. But I love and I pray for them. And this Jewish lady that I spoke with, she says, and she's not religious. She says, the Christians there, they're the solvent.
Mm.
Solvent. Whether she's religious or not, she knows that what they're doing is bridging gaps, and it's changing lives. Whether they believe Jesus is Messiah or not, most Jews and Christians today walk arm in arm, closer and better and sweeter than ever before. Me as a Christian, I kind of embrace my Jewish heritage with open arms. And sometimes I question, why are we not celebrating that? Why are we not celebrating this feast and doing that? It's so much fun. It's so great. It's giving, honor to God and in so many of these places. But I think in separating ourselves historically, we've gotten away from some of these wonderful things. So it seems like the best thing that we can do is pray for them. And if it's okay with you guys, I know we didn't touch on other subjects. I thought that this show might do that with this subject, but we'll have future news shows where we touch on some other variety of subjects. But I'd like to pray for Israel before we close, if that's okay. Father God, we just love your people. Father, all the people on this earth are your people. You created them. You gave them souls. God, you gave them brains, you gave them minds, you gave us creativity, you gave us tools in this modern age to reach out. God, we pray that even if it's just one person, that this program would reach them, would touch them, would help them to understand, would help them to be the impetus for change, Father, for a better kingdom, better world, a better future, and a better way to honor and glorify you. We thank you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.